He had been in a coma for 2 years until he heard a single sentence. Then he smiled, and what happened next changed everything. In a simple hospital in the heart of Texas, in one of the least traveled corridors, there is a room that almost no one visits. Inside, lying in a white bed, surrounded by machines that make constant, monotonous sounds, is Ethan, a young man of just 25 with a calm face, but no reaction. His body does not move, not even a finger. For most people who pass by, Ethan is just another patient in a vegetative state, trapped in a deep silence that has lasted almost 2 years. His room is always calm, but it is not a pleasant calm. It is a heavy calm. There is no laughter, no sound of television, no visitors bringing flowers or telling him news. All you can hear is the respirator and the beeping of the heart monitor. For months, no friends have visited. No family members, not even his mother, who now has a routine that does not include staying at the hospital. The days pass slowly in that place. No one knows much about Ethan, only that he had a motorcycle accident and has never woken up since. The other rooms around him receive visitors. They have people laughing, crying, talking. But Ethan's room remains the same, quiet, as if the world has already forgotten him. The older employees say that at first some people, besides his mother, visited him, but over time they stopped coming. Now he is alone with the machines, the white sheets, and the silence that fills everything. Emily was there at the hospital. She was a young nurse, but one of those who seemed to have been born to care for others. She didn't speak loudly. She wasn't in a hurry, and even on the hardest days, she always smiled. When she started working in that part of the hospital, no one talked much about the young man in room 27. They just said he was in a vegetative state and that he was a difficult case. But Emily didn't see a case. She saw a human being, a young man who, although silent, although immobile, was still there. The first day she entered the room, she felt a chill. It wasn't fear. It was something stronger, a feeling she couldn't explain. Ethan was lying with his eyes closed, but he seemed to have a different kind of peace on his face. Emily approached him, carefully adjusted his pillow, and said softly, "Hello, Ethan. My name is Emily. I'm the new nurse. I'm here to take care of you." She didn't expect an answer, but she spoke anyway. In the days that followed, she always returned with the same affection. She cleaned him carefully, put cream on his hands, combed his hair. Sometimes she brought flowers and placed them on the bedside table. She talked about the day, the patient's life, as if he were listening to every word, and deep down, she felt that he was. Today, it's raining outside, one of those rains that wet even the heart. One afternoon, as she wiped his face with a damp cloth, Ethan moved his eyes very slowly, even though they remained closed. Emily was a little startled, but then she smiled. There was something there, something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a presence. It was as if he were trapped inside, wanting to say, "I'm here, Emily. Can you hear me?" He didn't answer clearly, but Emily felt it. His gaze had a glow, a faint but steady glow, as if to say, "Don't forget me. I'm still here." That day, when she left the room, she didn't say anything to anyone, but she cried, hidden in the hallway. As the weeks went by, Emily formed a stronger bond with Ethan. She talked to him every day, even though she didn't get a response. She told jokes, read bits of books, sang softly. Sometimes she just held his hand, so he would feel that he wasn't alone. And the closer she got to him, the more she felt that there was something strange about the whole story. Rumor had it that Ethan had been in a motorcycle accident. That was the official version that everyone repeated, the one that was written on paper. An accident that happened on a rainy night and left him in that state. But Emily began to notice that the details were never clear. Every time she asked, someone changed a little bit of the story. One day, while looking for medicine in the doctor's room, she heard two nurses talking quietly, as if they didn't want anyone to hear them. "Did you see that Dr. Ricardo changed Ethan's report again?" "He changed it again." "Yes. He said it was to correct old data, but that's 3 times now." "That's strange." Emily stood still, pretending to look for something for a moment. She felt her heart beating faster. When she returned to the hallway, she tried not to think about it. She thought maybe it was her imagination, but the whispers began to be heard more often. Pieces of sentences, always short, always spoken quickly. It wasn't just an accident. He knew the other boy. It mustn't come to light. Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. At night, alone in her room, she mulled over everything she had heard. And as much as she tried to believe that Ethan was just the victim of an accident, her heart told her otherwise. The sadness on Dr. Ricardo's face every time he entered the room, the way he avoided looking directly at Ethan, all of that made her feel that there was something much bigger behind it all. Dr. Ricardo Valdez was one of those doctors who always stood firm. He walked quickly through the hallways in his clean coat, a pen in his pocket, and a serious expression on his face. He spoke little, and when he did, he got straight to the point. The other employees respected him greatly. They said he was very intelligent, with a lot of experience, but they also said he was cold as a stone. Emily noticed this from the very first days. Every time he entered Ethan's room, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier. He opened the door slowly, as if entering a place that hurt. He walked to the bed with soft steps. He looked at the machines, wrote something down on his chart, and left without saying a word. But what bothered Emily the most was something very simple. He never once looked Ethan in the eye. It was as if he was avoiding seeing something, as if he couldn't face the truth. One day, Emily was in the room changing the bed sheets when he came in. "Good afternoon, doctor," she said, trying to sound natural. Ricardo replied with a small gesture without looking up, looked at the machines for a few seconds, and turned away. Emily couldn't hold back any longer. She took a deep breath and said, "You never talk to him, do you?" The doctor stopped and stood still for what seemed like an eternity, but he didn't answer. He just walked out the door with the same silence as always. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something strange about his behavior. It wasn't just coldness. It was something deeper. It was as if he was carrying a secret guilt inside him. That night, looking at Ethan, Emily said softly, "I don't know what you're hiding, my friend, but I swear to God I'm going to find out. You're not alone." At the end of a cloudy afternoon, while Emily was organizing papers, she realized that someone had entered Ethan's room without knocking. It was unusual to see visitors there, so she approached cautiously. When she reached the half-open door, she saw a woman with her hair pulled back and tied with a simple scarf, sitting next to the bed, holding Ethan's hand affectionately. She looked to be about 50 years old. She was wearing simple clothes, her shoes were worn out, and she had a tired look on her face. But even so, her eyes shone as if they held a very old hope. On her lap, she had a small bouquet of wildflowers. She put the flowers in a glass of water and left them on the bedside table next to her son's bed. Then she began to sing very softly. It was a sweet melody, the kind that makes your heart feel calm. Her voice was soft, with a touch of sadness, as if each word had a little bit of nostalgia. She ran her fingers through Ethan's hair with a tenderness that only a mother can have. Emily stood there watching, waited a moment, and then approached slowly. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" The woman was a little startled, but she smiled kindly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm Ethan's mother. My name is Teresa." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Finally, someone from her family. At last. Ethan wasn't so alone. "Don't say that, Ms. Teresa. You're not bothering me at all. It's nice to see that he has someone close to him." Teresa looked at her son with tears in her eyes. "He always has. It's just that I didn't come very often because it hurt too much. I spent more than a year here every day. My life was ending. But now I come sometimes at the end of the day. I bring some flowers. I sing him a song I used to sing when he was a baby. I don't know if he hears me, but I like to believe he does." Emily sat down slowly on the armchair next to her and stayed there listening to Teresa tell stories. She said that Ethan was a sweet boy who helped the neighbors, who sold candy to help out at home. She said that he wanted to be a musician, but never had the opportunity to study, that he was quiet, but very observant, that he had a good heart. "He was everything to me," said Teresa, holding her hand tightly. "He still is, even though he's like this. He's my son, and I'm here every day." Emily pressed her lips together, trying not to cry, because at that moment, in that room filled with silence, Teresa's presence seemed to fill everything with love. It was as if, without words and without moving, Ethan knew that his mother was there, that his mother had never really left him. Emily and Teresa continued to talk almost every day. It was as if After so much time in silence, Teresa had finally found someone who wanted to listen to her pain, and she spoke and spoke with a full heart, her eyes filled with tears, while she caressed her son's fingers, as if she wanted to wake him up with her touch. Ethan had always been a happy child. Teresa began to stare at him, as if he were listening to every word. He smiled at everything, when he was given a piece of bread and butter, when he saw a puppy in the street, when I told him a story before bedtime. Emily smiled as she listened to her, but then Teresa became serious. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it was also very thoughtful. Sometimes he would stare at the ceiling, silent, with a lost look in his eyes. I knew what it was. He wanted to know who his father was. He never asked me angrily. He never complained. But you could tell he was missing something, you know? Emily just nodded. She felt a lump in her throat. Teresa continued. I never told him because when I got pregnant, before I told anyone, his dad was already with someone else. He left me without thinking, as if I were worthless. But he never knew I was expecting a child. And I got angry. I thought he didn't deserve to know. I thought he would just show up and then leave again. She paused for a moment, looking at Ethan's hand as if searching for courage. But now, seeing him like this, it hurts me to think that he might leave this world without knowing who he really is, without knowing where he came from. I don't know if he'll wake up, but if he does, he'll know. I think the time has come. Emily squeezed Teresa's hand tightly. The two of them remained silent for a while. The next morning, Emily arrived at the hospital early. She had felt a knot in her chest since their conversation the night before. What Teresa had told her weighed on her mind like a secret too big to keep to herself, and she knew that as difficult as it might be, the truth had to come out. When she entered the room, Teresa was already there, sitting in the same chair, with the same tired but determined look on her face. She was combing Ethan's hair with her fingers, as if he were a small child. Emily approached slowly, took a deep breath, and sat down next to her. Ms. Teresa, may I ask you a question? Teresa looked at her and gave her a small smile, as if she already knew what was coming. Why now? Emily asked, her eyes full of sincerity. After all this time, why do you want to tell him everything now? Teresa lowered her head, took her son's hand in both of hers, and took a moment to respond. But when she spoke, her voice was broken and pained, like someone who has carried a heavy burden for many years. Because I'm afraid, Emily, afraid that he'll leave like this, without knowing who he really is, without knowing who brought him into the world. I regret not telling him sooner, but I was so angry, in so much pain. She paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued. I thought I was protecting him, but now I understand that keeping the truth from him also hurts. Emily remained silent, listening to everything with a heavy heart. Then Teresa looked up with tears in her eyes and spoke firmly. I would never forgive myself if he went to God without knowing. I can't let my son leave with that void. He needs to know that he wasn't born out of nowhere, that he had a father, even if he was absent, that he had a history before all this. Emily took her hand, and the two of them stood there together. At that moment, they were not nurse and mother. They were two women with open souls, united by pain, by hope, by the desire to give Ethan what he deserved most, the truth. Even though he still couldn't hear with his ears, they knew. His heart could hear, and was waiting. After the conversation with Teresa, Emily spent the rest of the day with a restless heart. That unspoken truth seemed to echo inside her, like a silent cry for help coming from Ethan. Although he had said nothing, neither with gestures nor words, Emily felt that he deserved to know everything, and that perhaps, in some way, he already knew. It was as if his soul had been waiting for that moment for a long time. At the end of her shift, when everyone was leaving and the hospital was quieter, Emily decided to do something she had never done before. She opened the drawer of the nightstand next to Ethan's bed. It wasn't normal to go through a patient's belongings, but something pushed her to do it, like a breath in her chest. There were few things inside the drawer: a small necklace with a cross pendant, a note folded in half with a child's drawing, and an envelope at the bottom. Emily carefully picked up the envelope, which had no name on the outside. When she opened it, she realized it was a letter. Teresa's shaky handwriting filled the page with words full of emotion. The first sentence sent chills down her spine. If you are reading this letter, it is because God brought you back and took me away. Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. It was a farewell, a letter written by a mother who, before leaving, wanted to leave one last message for her son. She continued reading in silence, sitting next to the bed, her heart screaming inside. Son, I don't know if you'll understand everything right away, but I need to tell you the truth. A truth I hid out of fear, out of pain, and perhaps out of pride as well. The man who brought you into this world didn't know you existed. I was sorry I didn't tell him. I felt alone. Even so, I raised you with all the love in the world. You were my greatest joy, my light in the most difficult days. Emily pressed the letter to her chest and took a deep breath. Then she continued reading. I watched you grow up asking about him with your eyes. And every time I avoided your gaze, my heart ached. I didn't know what to do. And now, seeing you like this, between life and death, I just ask God to wake you up, to bring you back, so you can look him in the eyes and know who you are. And forgive me for taking so long to tell you, but I don't have much time left either. And I wanted you to be with me when I told you. Emily didn't finish reading. She folded the letter carefully, as if she were holding something sacred in her hands. She looked at Ethan and said softly, "You have to go back, Ethan. This letter can't stay hidden. You have to hear this from her own voice. There's still time." Emily reopened the letter that same night, alone in the hospital break room. The envelope was still warm from all the emotions she had felt hours earlier. She knew that this paper was more than a letter. It was a piece of Teresa's soul, a message that had to be read calmly, respectfully, with the heart. She sat on the couch and turned on a dim lamp and began to read again, now in a low voice, as if she were talking to Ethan. Your father is closer than you think. Emily paused. That simple sentence seemed to carry a lot of weight. Teresa's hands had shaken so much as she wrote that the letters were crooked, almost blurred. It was as if each word had been written with tears mixed with ink, and that made Emily understand. It wasn't just a revelation. It was a plea for forgiveness. The letter continued, and Emily read it aloud in a low voice, her eyes already filled with tears. You always looked at me with doubt, even though you didn't say anything. When you saw your friends with their dads, you smiled, but then you fell silent. I pretended not to notice. I said it was just you, but it wasn't. It was the emptiness, and I knew it. Emily clutched the paper, trying not to cry. She continued reading. I hid it because I was afraid that he would reject you, afraid that you would appear only to leave again, afraid to see you suffer. And I thought I was protecting you, but now I see that I denied you a part of who you are. You, Dad. He is closer than you think. You've already seen him. You've already heard his voice. He's here. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. Her heart was beating very fast. That's why Teresa was so nervous, so insecure. That secret was bigger than everything else. It was a shock, a truth kept hidden for years, the truth that could change Ethan's life if he woke up. She closed the letter carefully, as if she had touched something sacred. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "My God, he's already seen his dad. He just doesn't know it yet." And in that moment, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The truth was now with her too, and she knew more than ever that Ethan had a right to know. Even though his eyes couldn't see yet, even though his mouth couldn't speak yet, his heart needed to hear that truth. The next day, Emily arrived at the hospital with a heavy heart. She hadn't slept well. The phrase from the letter wouldn't leave her mind. Your dad is closer than you think. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a direct message. She could no longer pretend she didn't know. That truth had to come out, even if it was difficult, even if it hurt. When she found Teresa, she was sitting in the same chair next to Ethan's bed, her hands intertwined with his. Her face looked tired, but her eyes still had that light of a mother who never gives up. Emily approached, pulled up a chair, and sat down right in front of her. "Ms. Teresa, I read the letter." Teresa remained silent, took a deep breath, but said nothing. Emily then took the folded letter out of her robe pocket, placed it on her lap, and spoke slowly and firmly. "You said that his father is close, that Ethan has already seen him, and he's closer than you think, and that he is closer than you imagine. Who is it, Teresa? Who is Ethan's father? Teresa took a long time to look up. She stared at the floor for a few seconds, as if searching for courage among the cracks in the floor. She pulled Emily out of the room as if she were guarding her son's secret. When she finally looked at her eyes were filled with tears. "It's Dr. Ricardo," she said softly in a whisper. "Ethan's father is Dr. Ricardo Valdez." The world stopped for a few seconds. Emily felt her stomach churn, her mouth dry, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hardly believe what she had just heard. The doctor, cold and distant, who never looked Ethan in the eye, was his father. But how? Emily asked, her voice breaking. He never said anything, never showed anything. Teresa began to cry, a soft cry, but with the kind of pain that comes from within. He doesn't know. Maybe he suspects because he's seen me here, but he's not sure. I never told him. We met when I was working as a cleaner at the hospital, and he was still a student, many, many years ago. We were together, only once. I found out I was pregnant weeks later, but he was already with someone else. I never saw him again. I only found him here. When they brought my son to this hospital and put him under Dr. Ricardo's care, my world turned upside down. Emily put her hand to her mouth. Her heart ached at that story. It was a lot of pain kept inside for a long time. I was speechless. I looked at him and froze. I thought it was God's punishment. And at the same time, I thought, does he realize? Does he see something of his face in Ethan's face? But he never said anything, as if he didn't even remember me. And I was afraid again, afraid to open my mouth and lose my son again. Emily got up and hugged Teresa. A strong, silent hug, full of understanding. At that moment, there was no judgment, only feeling. The two of them cried together right there, next to Ethan. And more than ever, Emily understood. That truth had to be told. It couldn't remain hidden because there was a son waiting, a father who didn't know, and an opportunity to do everything differently. The woman in front of her was not just a mother. She was a woman who had faced everything alone. I got on with my life. I raised Ethan with what I had. He never asked me for luxuries, only love, and I gave him everything I could. I always tried to be both mother and father at the same time, but time passed, and I never managed to tell him, or Ricardo. Emily wiped a tear that rolled down her cheek. Her heart ached as if that story were her own. Teresa closed her eyes and said softly, "Now I see that silence also hurts, and I don't want to carry this burden anymore. If my son wakes up, he will know who his father is, even if it's late, even if it hurts." Emily took Teresa's hand affectionately and replied with a trembling voice, "He will wake up, and he will know that he had a mother who did everything for him and who did not give up on the truth." Teresa stood by the door, staring at Ethan's face, her voice coming out slowly, as if each word had to cross years of silence. "When my son had the accident, everything happened very quickly. They called me to say he was between life and death, and that they had taken him to this hospital. I rushed here without thinking, and when I arrived, my heart almost stopped. The one who was there with him, taking care of him, was Ricardo. The same look, the same personality. I recognized him instantly." Emily listened in silence, her heart aching. He didn't recognize me right away. More than 20 years had passed. I had changed. Time changes us, doesn't it? And I was also desperate, crying, afraid of losing my son. All I could ask was, is he going to survive? And Ricardo, without looking at me much, just said they were going to do everything they could. Teresa wiped a tear with the back of her hand. When I realized that he would be the doctor in charge, I was overcome with despair. I thought about telling him everything, telling him that this boy was his son, that this young man lying in that bed was his flesh and blood. But I froze. Fear was stronger. I thought, what if he doesn't care? What if he turns away? What if that only hurts Ethan more? He took a deep breath and continued. His voice grew quieter and quieter. I thought it was better to stay quiet, that maybe God would reveal the truth at the right time. But now I regret it, Emily. I should have spoken up, because from that day on, Ricardo was never the same. He took care of Ethan, but it was as if he avoided the room. He never stayed long. He never looked at my son's face. He would come over, look at the equipment, write something on a piece of paper, and leave quickly, coldly, distantly. Emily remembered that. She had noticed that behavior from the beginning, but now it all made sense. It wasn't coldness. It was pain. It was confusion. It was fear. Then Teresa finished, her eyes filled with tears. I think deep down, he knows, even though no one has told him. I think his heart feels it. That's why he can't look at Ethan's face, because every time he does, he sees himself. And maybe that hurts more than any words. Emily couldn't say anything. She just took Teresa's hand and stood there in silence, letting that truth settle within them both. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that once the truth began to come out, it could not be stopped. At the end of a quiet afternoon, as the sun gently streamed through the window of Ethan's room, Emily sat down next to Teresa and spoke with a heavy heart. The truth was alive between them. They could no longer pretend it was just a kept secret. It was a story waiting to be told, a story that Ethan needed to hear, even if he couldn't respond at that moment. Ms. Teresa, Emily began in a low voice, looking her in the eyes. I know it's difficult, but I think it's time. You have to tell Ethan, even if he can't react now, even if it seems like he's not listening, he deserves to know. I want to record you telling him, and if one day he wakes up, it will be important to have that recording. It will be important for him to hear it from you. Teresa swallowed hard, looked at her son for several seconds, and ran her hand through his hair, as she used to do when he was a child. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she was determined. Are you sure, dear? She asked in a trembling voice. Emily took her cell phone out of her robe pocket and replied affectionately, Yes, I'm sure. I'll record it. It's not for anyone else to see, just for him. God willing, one day he'll hear this and understand everything. Teresa took a deep breath, slowly got up from the chair, and stood next to the bed. She carefully pulled back the blanket, smoothed out Ethan's shirt, and held his hand in hers. Emily pressed the record button and nodded silently. Teresa began to speak, her voice weak at first, but full of feeling. My son, if you are listening to me now, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world, and that there is something I should have told you a long time ago. But fear stopped me, fear of hurting you, fear of you rejecting me. But now I understand that keeping this truth from you was what hurt the most. She paused, wiped away a tear, and continued with more strength. Your father, he never knew you existed. I met him when I was young. He worked right here in this hospital. We had just one moment together, and then he left. I found out I was pregnant when I was alone. I raised you with all the love I could, but you always looked at me as if searching for an answer, and I never had the courage to give it to you. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forehead on Ethan's hand, crying softly. My son, the man who has been taking care of you since the accident, the doctor who comes in every day with that distant look in his eyes. He is your father, Dr. Ricardo Valdez. I know this may confuse you, but you need to know. I don't want you to leave this world without knowing who you really are. You have a father, and he's closer than you think. Emily held the cell phone with trembling hands, her eyes filled with tears. The scene in front of her was heartbreaking. Teresa ended up kissing her son's forehead. If one day you come back to me, my love, I'll be here. And if I'm no longer here, you'll know that I loved you every day of my life. It was at that moment that something incredible happened. Ethan's lips, which had been still for so long, moved slightly, and a small, shy but real smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was quick, lasting only a few seconds, but it was enough to make time stand still. Emily opened her eyes wide and put her hand to her mouth, unable to contain her emotion. My God, she whispered, her voice breaking. Teresa looked at her son, then at Emily, unable to believe it. If that was it, he smiled. Emily dropped her cell phone and ran to the door. Doctor, nurse, please come now. Within minutes, 2 doctors and a nurse entered the room. Emily was trembling as she pointed to Ethan's face. She smiled. I saw him. You saw him too, right, Ms. Teresa? Teresa nodded excitedly, clutching her son's hand tightly. I knew it. I knew he was listening, that he was here with us all this time. The doctors approached the bed, examined Ethan, and checked his vital signs. One of them tried to explain in technical terms, but Emily interrupted him. No, doctor. It wasn't just his body that reacted. It was his heart. It was his soul. He smiled, because he felt it, because he heard his mother, because the truth touched where no one else could reach. Teresa was already crying with her face pressed against her son's hand. My child, my love, I knew. Mom always knew you hadn't left. The room was filled with emotion. It was as if that small reaction had brought life back to the place. As if Ethan, although trapped in an immobile body, had found a way to say, I'm here. And at that moment, no one doubted anymore. Emily, Teresa, the doctors, they all knew. Something had changed. A light had been turned on, and it all started with the truth, with a mother's love. Shortly after Ethan's smile, the news spread quickly throughout the hospital. Emily, still trembling, her heart pounding, ran to the doctor's room and asked them to call Dr. Ricardo immediately. She knew that moment had to come. There was no longer any escaping the truth. Ricardo appeared in the hallway with the same serious face as always, but when he saw Emily with red eyes and breathing heavily, he stopped, suspecting something. What happened? Emily said nothing, just nodded her head, asking him to follow her. They walked silently to the room. When Ricardo entered, he saw Teresa sitting next to the bed, holding her son's hand tightly, still with tears in her eyes. There was an emotion in the air that could not be hidden. Emily approached him with the cell phone in her hands and pressed play. The recording of Teresa's confession began to play. Her mother's voice was broken and emotional as she told the truth she had kept hidden for so long. Dr. Ricardo Valdez, he's your father. Ricardo stood motionless, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His eyes began to fill with tears, but he didn't look away. He continued to listen to every word until the end. When the recording finished, Teresa struggled to her feet, looked him straight in the eye, and said in a firm voice, he needed to know. And now, you need to know too. Ricardo took a step back, covered his face with his hands, and fell to his knees on the floor. It was as if everything he had always tried to hide, everything he had kept deep inside, out of fear, came pouring out all at once. He cried uncontrollably like a child. I read the file the day Ethan arrived, he confessed between sobs. Your last name without the father's, the age, the blood. Something told me it could be him, but I was in shock. I didn't want to believe it. I thought it was just a coincidence. Teresa listened silently, her face also wet with tears. Then I started to notice the features, the details, and it became impossible to ignore. I knew deep down, he said, putting his hand on his chest, that this child was my son. But I was afraid. Afraid to know it was true. Afraid of not knowing what to do. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid of loving. Emily, her eyes filled with tears, stepped forward and spoke affectionately. But he listened to you. He reacted when he found out. Now is the time to stay, not as a doctor, but as a father. Ricardo got up slowly, looked at Ethan as he had never looked at him before, touched his arm gently and whispered, forgive me, son, for not recognizing you before, for running away, but now I'm here, and I'm not leaving. And at that moment, inside a simple room, with flowers in a vase, tears on their faces, and a meaningful silence, three hearts were united by something that time could not erase: the truth. The next morning, the atmosphere in the hospital was different. What had once been a secret, kept within the walls of Ethan's room, was now beginning to reach other ears. The video Emily had recorded, Ethan's reaction, Teresa's tears, and Ricardo's confession. All of this was shared discreetly, but strongly in the hallways. Some doctors spoke in low voices. Nurses looked at each other with teary eyes. What happened there was not common. It was human. It was profound. Ricardo, however, was quieter than ever. Ever since he knelt in front of his son and told him the truth, he knew his life would never be the same again. He spent the night in the hospital, sitting in the chapel, alone, trying to collect his thoughts. For the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking like a doctor, but like a man, like a father. Early in the morning, he asked to speak to the hospital director. He entered her office with tired eyes but a firm voice. Emily went with him in silence, accompanying him, as if holding his hand, even without touching him. I'm here to hand in my resignation for an indefinite period, Ricardo said without hesitation. I can't keep working like this. I was wrong, and now I need to be something else. I need to be a father." The director was surprised. She knew something had happened, but she didn't imagine it was something so profound. She looked him in the eyes and asked, "Are you really sure?" Ricardo took a deep breath, his gaze fixed, more than ever. And so, without scandal, without notices posted on the walls, Ricardo left his position, took off his coat, put away his stethoscope, and left the room as if leaving behind a part of what he had been for so many years. Not out of weakness, but because he understood that he now had another calling, one that was more difficult, more delicate, a calling that came from a bed, from a slight smile, from a heart that had always waited for him. When he returned to Ethan's room, he didn't enter as a doctor, he entered as a father. He sat down next to the bed, took his son's hand gently and said softly, "Now I'm just your dad, son, and I'll be here until you come back to me completely." Emily never did anything halfway, but after Ethan's smile and the truth came to light, she began to care for him with more affection, as if he were part of her family. Her routine changed. She got up earlier, arrived before her shift started, and even after her shift ended, she stayed a little longer. She would rub cream on his arms, comb his hair carefully, play soft music on her cell phone, and read bits and pieces of books that Teresa said he liked when he was a child. And Teresa, she didn't leave anymore. She slept on an old armchair next to the bed, with a worn blanket, and her head always turned toward her son. Every day without fail, she would hold Ethan's hand and say, "Good morning, my love. Mom is here." Sometimes she would sit in silence for hours, just feeling his presence. Other times she would sing him softly the same lullaby she sang when he was little, a simple melody that always ended with, "I love you more than anything." The room, which had previously been filled with silence and machines, now had life, had the sound of hope. It had love in every corner. It was on one of those mornings that Emily noticed something different as she adjusted Ethan's pillow and spoke to him as she always did. She saw his eyelid move, stood still, and thought she had imagined it. She moved closer, stared at him, and again there was a small movement, as if he were trying to blink, even though his eyes were closed. "Ms. Teresa, come quickly." Teresa got up with effort, her heart pounding. "What's going on? Look at his eyes. He's blinking, even though his eyes are closed. Come and see." The two of them stood there in silence, watching, and suddenly a tear rolled down the corner of Ethan's eye. Just one, slow, silent, like a sign that something was happening inside him, something that couldn't be seen, but could be felt. "My boy, you're there, aren't you?" whispered Teresa, bringing her lips close to her son's forehead. Emily ran out and called the team. Doctors and nurses arrived quickly. They all approached, observed, took notes, and performed tests. One of them said in a low voice, "This is very rare, but it's real. He's reacting to stimuli. It could be the beginning of a neurological response." Emily looked at Teresa with eyes full of emotion. "He's coming back, Ms. Teresa. Slowly, but he's coming back." Teresa squeezed her son's hand and cried softly, "Thank you, God. Thank you." And in that moment, without saying a word, Ethan said everything he needed to say, because a tear sometimes says more than any voice. After that day when the tear rolled down Ethan's face, Emily understood that he felt everything. Maybe he still couldn't speak. Maybe he couldn't even really open his eyes, but his heart was already awake, and that was enough. So she started a new habit. Every day, after changing his bandages, carefully cleaning his skin, and kissing him on the forehead, Emily would sit next to his bed and open a book, a different one each week. They weren't difficult or complicated books. They were simple books, with stories full of feeling, stories of people who lost their way and then found it again, of children who fought with their parents and then asked for forgiveness, of mothers who waited years for a word from their children, of loves that never went away, even as time passed. She read aloud, calmly, pausing, as if telling a story to someone who listened to every detail with their heart. And when he returned, after so many years, she opened her arms as if he had never left. Teresa stayed by her side, listening too. Sometimes she closed her eyes and let the tears flow silently. Other times, She would hold her son's hand tightly and say, "Listen, my love, this story is yours too." Emily chose each story carefully. She knew it couldn't be just any story. It had to be one of those that touch the soul, one of those that remind us of what really matters. And as the days went by, Ethan seemed to react more. He moved his fingers a little. His breathing changed rhythm. A tear would fall from time to time. Small signs, but ones that filled the heart with hope. Today, I'm going to read you a story about a father who found his son after many years, Emily would say, looking at him tenderly. And even though time had passed, the love between them was still there, complete. The room was no longer a place of waiting. It was a place of encounters where words healed, where Emily's voice was like a hug, where each story was a bridge between Ethan and the world he still couldn't touch. And even though he couldn't answer, Emily could feel it. He was there, listening, feeling, remembering, slowly preparing to return. Ricardo couldn't leave the hospital. He couldn't leave Ethan. After leaving his job, he asked to return as a volunteer, not to practice medicine, but to be close. He wanted to help in some way, even if it was just organizing boxes, folding sheets, or serving coffee. Anything, as long as he could walk those hallways, as long as he could see his son from time to time, even from a distance. And that's what he began to do. He arrived early, dressed simply, without drawing attention to himself. He spent hours helping in the hospital pharmacy, carrying papers, organizing materials. It was as if that work kept him going, as if in the silence of those tasks, he was putting his own pieces back together. Sometimes, during the shift change of the doctors and nurses, he would take the opportunity to walk down the hallway where Ethan was. He would stand at the door without entering and look through the glass. Inside, he would see Emily sitting next to the bed with a book in her hands, and Teresa dozing in the chair, and between them, his son. Motionless but surrounded by love, Ricardo would stand there for a few minutes in silence, just watching, and his gaze was one of pain, but also of tenderness. It was the gaze of a father who had lost too much time, but now didn't want to lose another second. "Hello, son," he whispered, even though no one could hear him. "Daddy is here. I'm just waiting for the right moment for you to see me too." Emily had already noticed. She noticed when he passed by the glass. When he stayed for a few minutes and then left quietly, she said nothing. She respected everyone's time, but in her heart, she knew that his presence was making a difference. Ethan might not be able to see with his eyes, but perhaps he felt it with his soul. And so, day after day, Ricardo drew closer again, without haste, without fear, but with love. A love that had been silent for many years, but was now learning to speak slowly with simple gestures, as if to say, "I am here, and I am not going away." That afternoon, the hospital was quieter than usual. The sky outside was somewhat cloudy, and the air carried the scent of rain to come. Teresa had just taken a walk through the small garden next to the building, something she did from time to breathe deeply and think a little. When she returned to the hallway outside Ethan's room, she saw Ricardo standing near the window, his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. She paused for a moment. She thought about going straight to the room, pretending she hadn't seen him, as she had done so many times before. But something in her chest felt different. Maybe it was time to say what had been kept inside for too long. She approached him calmly. Ricardo slowly raised his eyes, surprised by her voice so close, and fell silent. The two looked at each other as if they were carrying many years on their shoulders, not in age, but in memories. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. He nodded. They walked together to an empty room nearby, used by the staff during their breaks. They sat across from each other with a small table between them. Teresa fidgeted nervously with her fingers. Ricardo looked at her with downcast eyes. She was the one who started. Why was it never her who started? "Why didn't you ever look for me?" Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Why, after that night when we were together, when I disappeared, you never tried to find out where I was. What happened to me?" Ricardo took a few seconds to answer. When he spoke, his voice was low, heavy. "I was a coward." She looked at him, waiting for more. He took a deep breath, looked at his own fingers resting on the table, and continued. "I was young, Teresa, full of plans, full of fear too. That night was special, but I thought you had left because you didn't want to know me anymore. And instead of going after you, of asking, I stayed silent, because it was easier to believe that than to face the possibility of having hurt someone. Teresa felt her eyes fill up, not with anger, but with sadness. I just spent nights waiting for you to show up. I thought he'll come back. He'll want to hear from me. But the days went by and nothing. I regret it, Teresa, he said, his voice breaking. I could have done things differently. I should have done things differently. If I had looked for you, maybe I would have known my son from the beginning. Maybe I would have seen his first step, heard his first word. Maybe I would have sung him to sleep. Tears ran down both their faces at the same time. There was no need to say anything else. The years would not come back, and no words would erase what had happened. But that moment, that conversation, was a step of courage, of truth, of peace. Teresa wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and said softly, "He's a good boy. He has a beautiful heart, and yet he lived with that emptiness, not knowing who he was. But now he has the chance to feel loved by both of us. So please, don't leave again." Ricardo took her hand on the table carefully, as if grabbing a piece of everything he had let slip away. "I'm never leaving again." In the days that followed, Emily began to notice something she initially tried to ignore. Teresa no longer got up from her chair so easily. She spent many minutes with her eyes closed, even when she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was shorter, heavier, and what worried Emily most was that cough. It was a dry cough that came out of nowhere, sometimes while they were reading books, other times in the middle of a conversation, a stubborn cough that made Teresa put her hand to her chest and close her eyes for a few seconds until it passed. Emily watched everything in silence, but her heart was alert. One day, while arranging Ethan's pillows, she saw that Teresa was sitting more hunched over than usual, her shoulders slumped and her right hand trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea. "Are you really okay, ma'am?" Emily asked kindly, sitting down next to her. Teresa forced a smile. "It's just tiredness, dear. Don't worry. It will pass." But Emily didn't believe her. She knew that kind of smile. It was the same smile patients used when they wanted to hide their pain so as not to scare those who cared for them. "Ms. Teresa, listen to me. I know you feel more than you say. That cough, that weakness, it's not just tiredness. I can make an appointment today. Let's go together, quickly." Teresa took her hand and replied with a sweetness that hurt more than a scream. "No, dear. I don't want to have any tests. Not for now. I want to use all the strength I have left here with him. I don't want to waste my time in a waiting room or hear a doctor telling me I have to leave. What I want most is to be close to my child, every second, every glance." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to insist. She wanted to convince her, but she knew that this decision came from a very deep place. It was a mother's love speaking louder than fear. It was courage disguised as calm. "But what if you need help?" Emily asked, her eyes filling with tears. "You're already helping me, Emily. More than you know. Just by listening to me, you're making a difference." Emily hugged Teresa right there in that room full of stories and hopes. She felt how fragile her body was, but she also felt how strong her heart was. The morning was quiet, with the sun slowly coming in through the window and birds singing outside. Emily arrived early as usual, with a new book in her hands and her heart full of hope. Teresa was already there with tired eyes, but with that sparkle that never faded. She was arranging her son's blanket, running her hand tenderly through his hair, and whispering words of love to him. "Today, I brought you another story, Ethan. This one is about new beginnings," said Emily, sitting down on the armchair next to the bed. She opened the book and began to read aloud, calmly, as if she were telling a story just for him. Teresa, as always, listened silently, holding her son's hand in hers. And when he returned, no one thought he could still love, but the heart has its own time, and love does not fade. Emily read in a sweet voice, and then it happened. Right in the middle of reading, Emily looked at Ethan's hand and saw a small movement. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but no. His little finger had moved. Then his index finger moved slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep, but it was real. Emily dropped the book in her lap and shouted with joy. He moved. Teresa. He moved his fingers. Teresa opened her eyes wide, not believing what she was hearing. She quickly looked at her son's hand and saw it. It was a small, visible movement, but his fingers were moving like a greeting that came from the soul. She put her hands to her mouth, her body trembling, and fell to her knees beside the bed. "My child, my life," Teresa cried, the words coming out between tears. Emily pressed the button to call the nurse, her heart beating fast. "Call the doctor. Call him now." He moved his fingers. "Ethan is responding." The minutes that followed were very hectic, but inside that room everything was like slow motion. Teresa couldn't stop crying, her face pressed against her son's hand, feeling for the first time in a long time a real sign of life from within. Emily also cried uncontrollably. It was too much emotion, too much joy. It was hope becoming reality. Ethan had responded. After so long, he responded. And at that moment it didn't matter how much was still to come. The struggle, the difficult days, the waiting. None of that mattered anymore, because now they knew he was coming back, and they were no longer alone. After that day when Ethan moved his fingers, it was a turning point. One day it was the smile, the eyes. The next day, the tears, and now the fingers. The neurologist in charge gathered all the professionals involved in the case and decided to begin treatment with neurological stimulation. It was a delicate process that required a lot of care, patience, and love. But now everyone had one more reason to fight. Ethan had responded. He was trying to come back. Emily was present throughout. She was the eyes and heart inside that room. With each new exercise, with each attempt, she held Ethan's hand, spoke to him, encouraged him with simple words. "Come on, Ethan. You're doing well. Just a little bit more. I'm here with you." Teresa, although her health was weaker, she did not stray from her son's side. And even though her body was tired, she insisted on holding a little bell near Ethan's hand so that he would try to touch it, even if only a little. She whispered to him, "Touch it, my son. Mom is with you. Show us that you still want to stay." Meanwhile, Ricardo continued to help. He stayed at home studying everything he could about similar cases. He read articles, watched videos, looked for new therapies, and every time he found something, he sent discreet messages to Emily. Try soft light and gentle ambient sound. Some patients react well to it. Stimulate with the smell of lavender. It can activate old memories. Emily read everything carefully and applied it, and over time, they began to see results, small glimmers of hope. Ethan responded better to familiar voices, to songs from his childhood, to the touch of the people he loved. It was during one of those sessions that he moved his neck for the first time, a slight movement to one side, as if he wanted to hear better. Emily let out a sigh, full of emotion. Teresa put her hand to her chest, her eyes shining. "My love, you want to come back. I knew it." Ricardo, upon hearing the news, was so moved that he couldn't write back. He just cried, silently. He knew that even though he was far away, he was taking care of his son in his own way, as his heart told him. And so, day after day, with love, faith, and dedication, Ethan's room began to change. It was no longer a place of silence, but of rebirth, because when love is combined with courage, even the impossible begins to show signs of life. Time passed, and Ethan continued to react little by little, with small movements and soft responses to his mother's voice and Emily's stimuli. It was as if he were slowly crossing from darkness into light. And even though he didn't speak, even though he didn't wake up completely, he showed that he was fighting. But while hope grew in Ethan's room, something else was slowly fading away. Emily had already noticed it. Teresa was paler, with deep circles under her eyes, walking more slowly, sitting down with heavy sighs every day. Her cough was more frequent, stronger, and yet she didn't complain, just smiled and said it was a badly cured flu. Emily, who knew every gesture Teresa made, could no longer pretend to believe that. One day, when she saw her almost fall as she got up from her chair, she decided they couldn't wait any longer. "Ms. Teresa, you need to get some tests done. It's not just fatigue. Please let me take care of you, too." Teresa looked at her with a sad but sincere smile. She sat back down, took Emily's hands, and replied in a firm, calm voice. "I know, my dear. I went to the doctor a few months ago. Before Ethan moved his hand for the first time, I had the tests done in secret because I already felt that something was wrong. They told me it's advanced cancer." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell me? We could have started treatment. Tried something." Teresa caressed Emily's face affectionately, like a mother talking to her daughter. "Because I didn't want to spend my last days in a hospital room far away from him, with wires and machines. I wanted to be here next to my son, holding his hand, smelling him, whispering in his ear every day. Mom is here, my love." She paused, breathing heavily. "The treatment could give me more time, but it wouldn't give me the chance to live that time with him. And I prefer a little time with love than a lot of time alone." Emily said nothing. She just bent down, hugged Teresa tightly, and cried silently, hiding her face in the shoulder of that woman, who, even though she was fading away inside, was still a giant. From that day on, Emily began to care for two hearts at the same time, and promised herself that until Teresa's last breath, she would never be alone, because those who truly love stay. Even though she knew it would hurt, Emily couldn't sleep that night. Teresa's words kept running through her head. The calm way she talked about her illness, the certainty with which she said she preferred to be close to her son than to try to get better. That hurt. It hurt because Emily knew that Teresa deserved more time. She deserved to see Ethan get out of bed, to hear his voice again, to receive a big hug from the son she loved with all her strength. The next morning, Emily arrived at the hospital determined. She entered the room with a heavy heart, but full of courage. Teresa was sitting in the chair next to the bed, holding Ethan's hand as she always did. Her face was paler, her lips a little dry, but her eyes still sparkled. Emily knelt beside her, took her hands firmly and said, "Ms. Teresa, listen to me, please. You can still try. There are treatments. There are doctors who can help. Don't give up now. Ethan is coming back. Don't you want to see him wake up for real? Get up? Talk to you?" Teresa smiled with tears in her eyes. She slowly ran her hand through Emily's hair, as if to calm a daughter who was suffering. "I want that too, my child. I want it more than anything in this world. But I've fought my whole life. I fought alone to raise him. I fought to put food on the table. I fought to hide my pain. Now I just want peace." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But don't give up like that, please." Teresa squeezed her hands tightly and replied in a voice full of tenderness, "My struggle is over. Now it's his turn to live. He's my boy. I've already given everything I had. Now I want to stay here watching him come back, sitting in this chair until my last breath, telling him every day that his mother never left." Emily lowered her head, rested her face on Teresa's lap, and cried. She cried because she couldn't save this woman who was so strong, so sweet, so full of love. She cried because she understood that sometimes the bravest thing to do is to know when to stop fighting for yourself and start living only for the other person. Teresa stroked Emily's hair and said softly, "Thank you for taking care of us. You are the angel God sent for this story, and even though I am leaving in peace, because I know he will not be alone, because he has you." And there, in that silent embrace, they both knew that time was running out, but that love would never end. On an afternoon quieter than the others, Ricardo entered the room slowly. He was carrying simple flowers in his hands, and a look of regret, but also a desire to do the right thing. Teresa looked up, smiled slightly, and pointed to the chair next to her. "Sit down for a moment, Ricardo. I want to tell you something." He sat down with a heavy heart, looked at Ethan, who was sleeping soundly, and then turned his gaze back to Teresa. "I'm here. Tell me." She took a deep breath, adjusted the scarf on her head, and calmly took his hand. "I don't know how long I have left, but I have one request. Just one." Ricardo nodded slowly, his eyes already filled with tears. "Of course, whatever you want." Teresa looked at Ethan, then at him, and said in a firm, though tired voice, "When our son wakes up, because I feel he's going to wake up, I want you to be here. Not just as a doctor, not with that little board in your hand, pretending he's just another patient. I want you to be here as his dad, so he can look over and know who you really are." Ricardo closed his eyes for a moment. The pain of everything he had lost squeezed him inside. But there, listening to Teresa, he also felt a call to start over. "You have my word. I will not leave his side, and if God gives me that opportunity, I will do everything he has not had until now." Teresa smiled sweetly, a weak smile, but one full of peace. That was all she needed to hear. Now I can rest a little more peacefully. Ricardo took Ethan's hand and squeezed it affectionately. He put his other arm around Teresa's shoulders, and the three of them stood there united by love, by truth, and by the hope that even though much time had been lost, it was still possible to build a new beginning. A beginning where silence would give way to words, where eyes would open, and where a son would finally recognize his father. It was a morning like so many others. The sky was clear, but the air had a different kind of silence. Emily arrived early, as always, carrying the same book she had been reading for days. Teresa was there with her head resting on the edge of Ethan's bed, and her eyes closed. She slept lightly, as if dreaming that time was turning back. Ricardo appeared shortly after with a hot coffee for Emily and a small vase with simple flowers, which he placed next to his son's bed. No one said much. They just looked at each other, sharing that moment with hearts full of hope. Emily sat down in the armchair, opened the book, and began to read aloud. The story was about a man who was reunited with his son after many years apart. The words flowed softly with emotion. Ricardo leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on Ethan. Teresa opened her eyes and stared at her son's face as she did every day. It was then, in the middle of a sentence, that Emily stopped reading, frowned, leaned over slowly, and said without raising her voice, "Teresa, look at this. Look at his eyes." Teresa rushed over, her heart racing. Ricardo instantly dropped his coffee cup and went to the bed. The three of them stood in complete silence, watching closely. Ethan's eyes were opening, first slowly, as if he wanted to wake up from a dream. His eyelids moved and his eyes opened for a few seconds. It wasn't long. There were no strong movements or words, but they saw it. His eyes were open, looking up, alive. Teresa put her hands to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. "My boy, are you here? Can you hear me?" Her voice came out shaky, broken with emotion. Emily ran into the hallway and called the doctors in a broken voice. "He opened his eyes. Quick, please." Ethan opened his eyes. Within seconds, the team entered the room. They performed tests, checked his vital signs, and measured everything carefully. One of the doctors, excited, looked at Emily and said with a sincere smile, "It's a good sign, a very important sign. He's coming back slowly, but he's coming back." Teresa knelt beside the bed, crying as if she had been reborn. Ricardo grabbed his son's hand tightly, tears running down his face, that face that always wanted to be strong. Emily stepped back a little, looked at the scene, and also shed a tear, because there in that room, it wasn't just Ethan opening his eyes. It was life coming back. It was love saying that it's never too late to start over. Teresa moved a little closer, leaned over slowly, brought her lips close to her son's ear, and said in a broken voice, almost a whisper, "I love you, my child. Mom is here." At that very moment, she felt it, a slight squeeze of her fingers. Ethan squeezed her hand weakly. Teresa brought her other hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. She began to cry softly, as if she wanted to shout to the world, but without making a sound, only with her heart. He squeezed my hand. My son squeezed my hand. She whispered excitedly, her eyes shining like never before. She took Ricardo's hand, slowly brought it to Ethan's, and joined the two together. "This is your father, my love. This is the man who has loved you since before he knew you existed," Teresa said with a trembling voice, but full of tenderness. Ricardo knelt beside the bed, moved, his eyes fixed on his son. He held that hand as if he had found the part he was missing. "Forgive me, son. I am here and I will never leave again." And that's when it happened. 2 tears rolled from Ethan's eyes. 2 silent drops that said everything he couldn't say with words. They were tears of recognition, of feeling, of acceptance. He knew Even though he didn't speak, even though he had no strength, he knew. Ricardo began to cry like a child, a cry stuck for years of absence, of fear, of silence. Teresa put her hand on his shoulder, and the two stood there, united by pain, by love, by the hope that was breathing again in that room. Emily watched from afar, crying too. It was impossible not to be moved, because at that moment, 3 hearts separated by life were finally beating together. And that reunion was all Ethan needed to keep coming back. Teresa already felt deep in her chest that her days were coming to an end. Her body warned her with every slower step, every louder cough, every sleepless night. But her heart was at peace, because what she wanted most had already happened. Her son was coming back. Ethan had opened his eyes, squeezed her hand, cried, and above all, felt love, the love of a mother, a father, of people who never gave up on him. On one of those quiet afternoons, Teresa called Emily to come out of the room. The two went into the hallway, and she handed her a carefully folded white envelope with Ethan's name written in shaky handwriting. "Here, daughter," Teresa said in a soft voice. "It's a letter I wrote some time ago, in the days when I felt I wasn't going to last much longer. There are things in here that I could never say out loud, but that he needs to know. If one day I'm no longer here, will you promise me you'll read it to him?" Emily took the envelope carefully, as if she were holding a piece of Teresa's heart in her hands. "I promise, Ms. Teresa, but you still have time. You can read it to him." Teresa smiled wearily, but lovingly. "Maybe, but right now I want to enjoy him, Emily. I want to save the days I have left, to look into his eyes, to hold his hand, to kiss his forehead. I've spent too much time in silence. Now I know. Now I just want to live every second I have. And when I'm gone, you give him what I've written." Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged Teresa tightly, feeling in that embrace the love of a mother who fought until the end. Teresa was small in stature, but giant in heart, and although she knew that the moment of farewell was approaching, she decided not to waste her time with fear. She decided to love. She decided to be present. She decided to leave words for when her voice could no longer be heard. And in that envelope was everything: love, forgiveness, memories, and the certainty that Ethan would never be alone. Because a mother, even when she is gone, lives on in the words she leaves behind, in the memories she sows, and above all, in the love that never dies. The following days were like small, silent victories. Each new gesture from Ethan was an explosion of joy stored in the hearts of those who loved him. Teresa could no longer sit for long periods of time, but she always found a way to be close to him, even if it was just resting her head on the edge of the bed. Emily continued to be the arm strength and smile of everyone in the room. Ricardo came every day, always with the same care and respect. Ethan still couldn't speak, but his eyes were already moving from side to side with more confidence. When he heard his mother's voice, he blinked slowly, as if to say, "I hear you." When Emily read him a new story or played soft music, he moved his fingers a little, especially those on his right hand. It was a small movement, but made with effort, as if to say, "I'm here. I haven't given up." "Very good, Ethan. Very good, my love," Emily would say, holding his fingers affectionately. "Every movement you make is a step toward coming back to us." Ricardo would sit next to his son, with eyes full of emotion. Sometimes he would borrow a guitar from a hospital worker and play softly in a corner of the room. It was simple music with soft chords, just to fill the air with love. Ethan, upon hearing it, would slowly close his eyes, as if letting himself be lulled. "He responds more when you play," Emily would say, smiling. "It seems that the music calls him back." Teresa, weak but present, clung tightly to her faith. She knew she wasn't going to see everything, but she clung to the little she could see, because every finger that moved, every stronger blink, was life blossoming again. "You can do it, my love. Mom is here. I'm with you," she whispered tenderly. And Ethan, although trapped in his own body, gave small but eager signs. It was like watching a flower open every dawn, slowly but strongly, with a desire to live, with hope reborn. And that was what kept everyone going. Because when someone we love begins to return, even if it is in silence, our hearts are filled with light. The days passed, and although hope grew in Ethan's small gestures, Teresa's body no longer responded as it had before. She breathed with more difficulty, slept almost all the time, and could barely get up from her chair. But even so, every day she asked to stay by her son's side. Although she didn't have the strength to speak, she kept her forehead pressed against his hand, caressing him with her thin fingers. The morning Teresa left, the room was especially quiet. The sun slowly streamed through the window, illuminating Ethan's face as he slept peacefully. Emily arrived as usual with a new book, but she immediately noticed that something was different. Teresa was there, sitting in the chair next to him with a slight smile on her lips and her eyes closed. Emily approached her and called her name, but Teresa did not respond. She touched her shoulder gently, and that was when she understood. Teresa had left quietly, just as she had lived alongside her son, holding his hand lovingly until the very last second. Emily knelt on the floor, crying softly. Her heart felt tight, as if she had lost someone from her own family. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and looked at Ethan, who remained motionless, but with wet eyes, open, quieter than ever. She approached him affectionately, took his hand, and said with a trembling voice, "She's gone, Ethan. Your mom is resting, but she left peacefully by your side, just as she wanted. She loved you until her last breath, and now, my love, it is you who must carry on for her, for everything she did, for everything she was." Ethan didn't respond, but his eyes seemed deeper at that moment, as if they held the pain, the emptiness, but also the love that remained. Because a mother like Teresa doesn't die, she just changes places and is still there, in every gesture, in every memory, in every heartbeat of a child she never stopped loving. The next day, Ethan's room felt emptier. The chair where Teresa always sat was still there, just the same, but without her. It was as if the air were heavier, sadder. Emily entered slowly, her eyes still swollen from the night before. She was carrying the envelope Teresa had left, the one with the shaky handwriting and Ethan's name written so carefully. That letter was a mother's last embrace. She sat down next to the bed, took a deep breath, and before opening the envelope, she tenderly stroked Ethan's hair. "Today, I'm going to read you something very special, Ethan. It's from your mother. She left this for you for when she could no longer speak with her mouth, but could still reach you with her heart." Emily opened the letter and began to read in a soft, slow voice, full of emotion. "My son, if you are listening to this, it is because I am no longer here with you, but I want you to know that from the first second I knew you were inside me. I loved you. Seeing you being born was the most beautiful moment of my life. Seeing your eyes for the first time, hearing your little cry. I was never the same again." She paused, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and continued. "I watched you grow up strong, intelligent, full of questions. You saw the world as someone who wanted to understand everything, and even though you didn't say anything, I knew you wanted to know who your father was, and that hurt me because I didn't have the courage to tell you. But I always hoped that one day you would find out, and that his heart would recognize you too." Emily felt Ethan's hand move a little. She looked at him, her heart pounding, and continued reading. Now her voice was trembling. "My son, I ask your forgiveness for everything I kept from you. But I want you to know that every silence of mine was out of fear of hurting you, and I lived every day of my life for you. If you can now hear my written voice, it is because you have returned. And if you have returned, then my heart can rest." Emily paused, closed her eyes for a second, and when she looked back at Ethan, she saw something incredible. His lips were moving very slowly, but they were moving. She leaned in with her eyes wide open and heard the faintest, sweetest sound, almost like a whisper. "Ma." Emily covered her mouth with her hand, unable to hold back her tears. "He said it. He said, 'Mama.' My God, Ethan, you spoke. You spoke." She rested her forehead against his, crying as if she had received a miracle. She heard him. I'm sure she heard him. From heaven. Your mom heard you call her. And in that moment, between tears and quiet words, Teresa's love lived on in the sound of her son's voice, in the hope she never gave up, in the reunion that happened even after her departure. Ricardo spent the night without sleeping, sitting at the table in his house with a notebook in front of him, and his hands trembling after Teresa's death, and that little miracle of hearing Ethan whisper, "Mom." Something inside him also broke, or maybe it was fixed. For the first time in years, he understood that he could no longer hide who he was. Ethan had to know, and so did the world. The next morning, Ricardo called Emily. "I need to talk to you. I want to do something, but I need your help." Emily went to his house. She found a different man with the same serious face, but now with calmer eyes and an open heart. "I want to record a video, a simple video telling everything, that Ethan is my son, that I was wrong to take so long, to run away, but that now I'm here. I want to do it for him and for Teresa too, because they deserve the truth, and I need to get this off my chest." Emily took his hand firmly. "Then let's do it. Let's do it together." They went to the hospital, borrowed a room, turned on the cell phone, and placed it in front of Ricardo. He took a deep breath, looked straight at the camera, and began. "My name is Ricardo Valdez. For years I was a doctor at this hospital, but today I speak as a father, the father of Ethan, my son. It took me a long time to accept that. I was afraid. I hid. But life taught me that you can't run away from love. You can't ignore what you feel. Ethan, you are my son, and if you ever see this, I want you to know that I am here, and I will be here until the end, waiting for your embrace." Emily finished the recording with tears in her eyes. They uploaded the video to social media. Ricardo didn't expect anything. He just wanted to get it off his chest. But what happened was much bigger than that. In a few hours, the video went viral. Thousands of people began to comment and share it. People from all over the country wrote messages of support, love, and hope. "Ethan, we are with you. Your dad loves you. Come back soon. Your story touched my heart. Stay strong, beautiful family." Letters arrived at the hospital. Flowers, notes, short videos of children saying they were supporting Ethan. It was as if the whole world had stopped for a moment to love Ethan along with them. Ricardo read each message with tears in his eyes, and each one made him feel that he was doing the right thing. Because when you choose to love truly, without hiding, without fear, the world responds. And it responds with love, too. The days became lighter in that room where before there had only been silence. Now Emily and Ricardo were always there, caring for Ethan with all the love and dedication in the world. They took turns, patiently, shared tasks, exchanged knowing glances, words of support, and a love that grew slowly but surely. They were no longer just a nurse and a father. They were two hearts that had found each other in pain and were learning to heal together. Emily carefully prepared his baths, told him the news of the day, and read messages from social media to Ethan. Ricardo cleaned the equipment, organized the medicines, but what he liked most was sitting next to his son and quietly playing a few songs on the guitar. They learned to listen to Ethan with their hearts. Every blink, every little movement of his fingers, every louder sigh. It was a silent conversation between them. "Did you see that?" Emily would ask with an excited smile. He moved his neck. Ricardo turned it a little bit this way. Ricardo would drop everything and run to the bedside. With his face lit up with hope, he would gently touch his son's shoulder. "Ethan, my son, Daddy is here, and you are doing very well, my warrior." And so, little by little, like a flower blooming after a long drought, Ethan began to move his neck more vigorously. At first, he only turned it a little. Then he began to follow the voices, to follow the light with his eyes. And one day, Emily was reading a passage from a book that Teresa loved when she noticed something different. Ethan's lips were trying to move. She dropped the book and ran to him. "Ricardo, come here. He's trying to talk." Ricardo rushed in. The two of them stood in complete silence, listening intently. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and with great effort spoke. His voice was weak but clear, enough to break the heart of anyone who heard it. Thank you." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filled with tears. Ricardo fell to his knees beside the bed, crying. "Thank you," Ricardo repeated. "Thank you, son, for fighting, for coming back, for not giving up on us." And at that moment, with a single word, Ethan said it all. Thank you for life. Thank you for love. Thank you for not leaving. Because even though he couldn't speak, he always felt it. And now, he could finally begin to say it after that first word spoken with such effort. Thank you. Ricardo felt as if something inside him had opened up again. It was as if the time lost with Ethan was slowly coming together with simple but meaningful gestures. And one of those gestures was bringing the guitar to the hospital. It was an old instrument that had been stored for many years at the back of the closet. Ricardo could hardly remember how to play, but just holding the guitar in his hands made him feel that this was what he had to do. Not for himself, but for his son. The next afternoon, he entered the room with the guitar on his back, feeling a little sad. Emily, do you think I can try to play a little for him? Emily, who was carefully changing the sheets, smiled tenderly. Of course, Ricardo. It will be beautiful. He will like it. Ricardo sat down on the chair next to the bed, tuned the guitar calmly, and began to play soft chords. He chose a simple melody, without lyrics, just the sound, a sound that filled the room with peace. Ethan, his eyes still weak, slowly turned his face toward the music. The sound seemed to touch something inside him, something long forgotten. Emily, moved, whispered, "He's feeling it. Look how he's moving his eyes. He's remembering." In the days that followed, playing the guitar became part of the routine. Ricardo would arrive, sit next to his son, and play at the same time every day. He played calm songs, cheerful songs, and some that seemed too old to be there, but that made Ethan smile with his eyes. It was then that Emily found an old notebook tucked away in a forgotten bag, a simple diary that Teresa had brought to the hospital in the early months. Inside was a piece written in her handwriting. Ethan always loved music. As a child, he would dance even with a pot in his hand. He said that music made his heart happier. Emily handed the notebook to Ricardo with tears in her eyes. Here it is, proof that you found the right path. The love of music comes from within. It's a thing that passes from father to son. Ricardo pressed the diary to his chest and played with even more enthusiasm that day. He played as if he were talking to his son through the strings, and Ethan, though still fragile, shed a tear of emotion, because more than ever, he knew he was being loved with music, with patience, with truth, and that was everything to him. Emily was organizing the drawers in the room when she found a forgotten folder hidden under an old blanket. Inside were several notebooks covered with faded stickers, pages worn by time, and letters written with force, as if the heart were pouring out of the pen. She sat down on the armchair next to the bed, with Ethan watching everything with attentive eyes. She opened the first notebook and began to read aloud carefully, respecting each word as if they were tshures jikritans. Today, I thought about what it would be like to play the guitar while looking at the sea. I've never seen the sea, only in photos, but I imagine it must be something huge, beautiful, and peaceful. One day I'm going to see it up close. Emily paused for a moment, squeezed her eyes shut to keep from crying, and continued reading. I want to sing on a beach, sit on the sand, close my eyes, and feel the wind on my face. I think that there, in that place, my heart would rest a little. She turned a few more pages and discovered, line by line, who Ethan was before the accident. She discovered that he was afraid of being forgotten, that he sometimes felt lonely, that he dreamed of having a band, that he wrote songs that he never showed anyone. I like to watch people on the street. Imagine what they are thinking. Does anyone see me like that too? Emily looked up and saw Ethan with tears in his eyes. It was more than emotion. It was a reunion. It was as if he were listening to his own soul being read aloud. She approached the bed, took his hand affectionately, and said, "You were not forgotten, Ethan, and the sea will still see you. I promise you that. One day you'll get there, and you'll play your guitar on the sand for yourself, for your mom, and for everything you kept inside." Ricardo, who was listening silently near the door, let a tear fall without saying anything, because new dreams were being born in that room, and this time, no one was going to leave them on paper. Ricardo spent days in silence, sitting next to Ethan's bed, with the diary open in his hands. He read over and over again the part where his son talked about the sea, about his desire to see the water touch the horizon, to feel the wind on his face. He couldn't get it out of his head. It was more than a written dream. It was a cherished desire. One morning he called Emily over to a corner of the hallway. "Emily, I've been thinking about something. I think it's time for Ethan to fulfill that dream." Emily opened her eyes in surprise. "The sea?" Ricardo nodded with a shy smile. "I've already spoken to the medical team. If we take every precaution, the trip is possible and I want you to come with us. He trusts you, and so do I." Emily put her hand to her chest, overcome with emotion. "Of course I'll go. We're going to take him to see the sea, Ricardo. It's going to happen." In the following days, preparations began. The hospital lent them an adapted ambulance. The nurses helped with the necessary equipment, and a doctor closely monitored the entire plan. Ethan, now with a firmer gaze and some controlled movements, was calmly informed. When Ricardo told him, holding his hand, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Let's go together, son. You, me, and Emily are going to show you the sea." The trip took place on a sunny morning. It was long, but everything was done with love and care. Emily sat next to him during the trip, talking to him softly, describing everything she saw out the window. Ricardo drove in silence, but with a full heart. When they finally arrived at the beach, Ricardo stopped the car in front of the sea. Emily got out first, opened the doors of the ambulance, and settled Ethan into the special chair. The sound of the waves, the smell of salt, the warm wind, it all came at once. Ricardo and Emily slowly pushed the chair to the edge of the sand. Ethan did not move, but his eyes were alive, large, bright, like those of a child seeing the world for the first time. And then, when the breeze touched his face and the sun gently warmed his skin, Ethan did what everyone expected. He smiled, a big smile, but one filled with tears. A smile from someone who felt, from someone who understood that life was still his, that dreams, although difficult, can come true. Ricardo knelt beside him and cried. Emily took his hand and whispered, "See, Ethan? The sea always waited for you, and now it smiles with you too." And in that moment, everything made sense, because love, courage, faith, and the will to live brought Ethan to the sea, to his dream, to the place where the soul can breathe again. The sun was already beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. The sea remained calm, with a lull that seemed to embrace the emotions of everyone there. Ricardo was kneeling on the sand next to Ethan's chair, his eyes filled with tears and his heart beating fast. He held his son's hand with both hands, as if holding a miracle, as if holding a whole life that had almost been lost. The wind ruffled his hair, but he didn't care. His face was turned toward Ethan, his eyes fixed on his, and his voice came out soft but firm, with a love he had never said aloud. "I love you, son. I love you with all my heart." Ethan looked into his father's eyes, blinked slowly, took a deep breath, and then, with great effort, moved his lips. His voice came out weak, hoarse, almost like a whisper, but clear enough to break the world with emotion. "Dad." Ricardo brought his hands to his face and let himself cry. That word was what he most wanted to hear. It was as if all the lost time was turned into forgiveness in that moment. He pressed his forehead against his son's hand, crying uncontrollably, repeating softly, "Thank you, son. Thank you." Nearby, a little further away, Emily watched everything with a heavy heart. She stood with her arms crossed, her face wet with tears. She cried silently, letting her emotions flow slowly and unhurriedly, but in the midst of her tears, she smiled. It was a calm smile, full of gratitude, because she had seen everything happen. She had cared, believed, stayed when everyone else had left, and at that moment, seeing the father and son truly meet for the first time, she understood that it had all been worth it. Every day of waiting, every sleepless night, every tear, she whispered to herself, almost without a voice. Every second was worth it, and she stood there quietly, feeling the wind touch her face with a full heart. Because when love wins, there is no need to say anything, just feel and give thanks. Months after that trip to the sea, Ethan's story had already touched many people. Ricardo's video, the moments that brought tears to the eyes. the slow recovery, full of faith. All of this caught the attention of a group of journalists who were visiting the hospital to do a report on stories of struggle. When they heard about Ethan, they wanted to know more. Emily told them, Ricardo told them, and eventually Ethan himself, who was now speaking more clearly, also began to tell them. That's how the idea for the documentary was born. Not to show only the sad part, but to show what love can achieve, what truth can heal, and how a child, even if he is silent, can hear the whole world if he has someone who doesn't give up on him. The recordings were done calmly. They used old images, photos that Teresa had kept, videos that Emily recorded during the readings, scenes from the reunion with his father, and, of course, the trip to the sea. Each part of the story was told with emotion, with respect, with truth. When it came time for the last scene, they asked Ethan to say something of his own, something that would close the story with heart. He thought for a few seconds, looked at Ricardo, who was next to him holding his hand, and then at Emily, who was smiling behind the cameras. He took a deep breath. His voice was still soft, but full of soul. Sometimes you just need one truth to wake up. And then he smiled. Tears welled up in everyone's eyes. The director, the cameramen, the doctors, the hospital team that had accompanied them, because that simple, direct phrase said it all. What Ethan experienced, what Teresa fought to tell, what Ricardo had the courage to accept, and what Emily carried with such love. The documentary premiered in a simple auditorium, filled with people with open hearts, and everyone who saw it left with red eyes, but with a light soul, because stories like Ethan's are not erased. They remain within us. And every time someone asked him if he was still missing something, Ethan replied with a smile, "No, I have everything. I have the truth." And with that, life began again. What about you? Do you believe that love and truth can awaken the impossible? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories.